26th June 2024. This is Norman Michaelation. This is I.C.A.C. Unpacked. I'm sitting here at my kitchen table and I'm looking over the interrogation video that I had, CD rather, that I had transcribed sometime after I was arrested, because I was bothered by a couple of things. When we sat down to look over the evidence and we looked over my devices, we looked over their discovery that they had provided us, several questions kept ringing in my ears, and one of them had to do with hash codes, which was an odd thing only because I didn't know anything about it. Now it turns out it's highly significant. But the thing that really bothered me, that I needed to know immediately what it meant, is Detective Bauer kept talking about how he had changed his pick and he wanted me to find him. Again, this was Alex VA. I didn't know it was a detective. And it made no sense to me, except that it sounded like something somebody would do if they were trying to hide because they were being, if you excuse the word, policed. And I was about to have 2 phone calls that would bear this out. And I wondered what was going on with this person. Why would you say change my pick unless there was a real reason? Well, it turned out there was a real reason. He was a cop and he was trying to hide. He was trying to hide from the folks on the webmasters or the system administrators, whatever you want to call them, because he, unbeknownst to me, had discovered that I was successful in getting him thrown off the site, and he was actually locked out of the Alex VA account. So he had to create a new account, which he called Alex, and he put a bathroom icon on it. The male bathroom icon, the arrow, the circle with the arrow extending from one part of the circle. Which was very strange and confusing because there were a lot of Alexes. There were Alexes and Alexanders, and Alexis or two, and any number of Alexes. And I was trying to carry on conversations with all these people at the same time trying to help this person. To me, I'd never been on very much social media. I never had Facebook or Twitter, as I've said many times. MySpace, I think, had just died somewhere along the line. My stepson was on that. I was not. And I was working 5 jobs fairly recently, and I was still working 3 by the time of my arrest. So I didn't have any time to be on social media and had never had the typical social media that a lot of people had. So I was bothered by those 2 things. Now, there's a couple considerations you need to understand as I'm going through this interrogation video, which I transcribed, which tracks very closely to the official transcription that one of my attorneys did later. And he wanted to check my work. Well, mine is different in that there's a couple of points that I didn't hear correctly when I was listening to it, but they're insignificant. What is significant about my version is that it's annotated. So I have exact dates and times and my notes as to what's really happening, because when you look at the video and you are observing it, you're seeing things that seem like it's everything, but it's not. What you're not seeing is that the phone is flat on the counter, on the desk. You're not seeing him turn it this way or that. You're not seeing him scrolling quickly through it and asking me about this and then backing it up really quickly and showing me something else. And it's very confusing. And as I told him, as he tried to get my buy-in to his version of the story, I would say, no, that's not what I remember. No, that's not true. No, why are you asking me that? Why are you saying it like this? So that's what you need to keep in mind as I'm going through this, okay? And it's very kind of interesting as we go through this point that I'm just looking at my notes here, that there's a lot going on. It's very confusing. It's very disorienting. I'd never been arrested before. As I said, I had one parent going into the hospital, another one coming out, and I had a friend from Turkey living with me for a couple of days prior to his returning to Turkey because he had to give up his apartment in Alexandria. So this is everything that's going on here. I've been attacked by the trolls, I might add too. Oh, these are only excuses. Well, one man's excuse is another man's explanation. This is what actually happened. Okay. Um, so, one last thing before I go into it, I wish I had remembered a couple of cardinal rules, right? One of the cardinal rules that you need to keep in mind about Detective Bauer and about cops in general, because cops can, first of all, legally lie to you. They can legally lie to you in furtherance of an investigation. They can, and they're allowed to by law. And if you believe, number two, that they don't sometimes abuse this right, well, you haven't been paying very careful attention. And then three, when they're caught, they cover it up. In 2012, Detective Bauer had made a terrible mistake in a traffic stop, and he thought he had this woman red-handed and it would look good, I suppose, for his career. He didn't realize that this woman was an older professional and that she worked for the Department of Corrections and she knew something about the law and what was permissible and what was not. And since he was wrong on the facts, he decided to try to write her up for impersonating a police officer because he saw a little badge here. And he took statements she had made out of context. And the upshot of that was he was sued successfully by her. His appeals, his many appeals, all the way to the Federal Court of Appeals, were roundly thrown out. And he is now a textbook case in the Fourth Circuit, of which Virginia is a part, the Fourth Federal Circuit, for exactly what not to do as a police officer if you want to gain qualified immunity. That's Robert M. Bauer, B-A-U-E-R, the man who 6 years later attacked me online and his very first sting and got away with it. So that's something. The final thing I want you to understand is that you have a constitutional right not to talk to police. And I knew this. So why did I talk to police? Why did I give them my passcode so they could get into my phone, which I terrifically regret? Well, because I didn't do anything wrong. I knew that I was trying to help this young person. I knew there wasn't any sex talk. I knew there were no pictures until they found one that somehow got onto an account that I had asked and was deactivated. And I was still convicted. So, some people have been convicted for even less. So I want to go through in this first installment the first 7 pages, maybe a little less, just to give the people who are wondering how police do their interrogations some indication of how police manipulate facts. And again, if I had followed my constitutional right and not said anything, I might not have been convicted. I tried to explain, because I thought it was important, that there was a young person in trouble. And I didn't know at this point in the interview, I didn't know, A, that there was no person. I had been led by Detective Bauer to believe there was, and that there was a concerned guardian, the aunt, who, by the way, didn't exist, who had called the police claiming I was trying to do something with her charge. That's what I believed when we started this, because that's what he told me. I would continue to believe that until they took me after this interview to the magistrate. I think it was after. And they told me in front of the magistrate, he said that this was a decoy persona. And I said, what? And of course, this might be on film, but they didn't provide that to me. And I didn't have any need to have it. So it's just simply my word against his at that point. But I didn't know until I went before the magistrate that this was a decoy for sure. Certainly crossed my mind at one point, but I didn't know. A lot of things crossed my mind, as you would do if you were trying to get a handle on what was going on. But it did appear that this person was trafficked and at one point suicidal, and certainly reaching out to somebody to try to help them. So the interrogation begins at 8:20 p.m., according to my notes here, at the Fairfax County Police Headquarters off of Monument Drive near the city of Fairfax. I fill out paperwork for about an hour or so, sign things, And Detective Bauer said, let's begin. And they begin rolling. And his first question is, how'd you end up here today? And that was 9 minutes, at 9:10, actually, I think it was. And I said, well, first of all, I asked if it's being taped. And he said, yes. I said, great, or recorded. And he said, it's for accuracy that they do that. And I said, yes, that made sense. It's accuracy is what I'm concerned about too. And then he says, there's two sides. And he says, we want to know what we can prove through technology. And we also want to know why you ended up here. And in my opinion, he said, that's the most important part. Standard interrogation. Okay? And I told him it's hard to answer that question. I didn't do the arrest. You did it. I said, whatever it says on your sheet is your reason. I said, my reason was, quote, I was concerned about this kid, but I had to override. I said what I thought was an overriding concern. And I was speaking haltingly because I was very disoriented. I was confused and I was afraid. He says, okay, start from the beginning. I said, what do you want me to say? You're asking, are you questioning me how I'm here? Just ask the questions. And again, I'm reading as it says here in the script. Okay, I'd rather you ask the questions and I'll do what I can to answer them, I say. Sure, fine. I said, it's fairly complicated, but I want you to understand I was not soliciting a minor. I was not. Okay, let's start with Alex. How do you know Alex? Now I'm going to stop there here at, 10 minutes, 24 seconds into the interview. So remember, he starts a new persona where he says, I want you to find my pick. And the new persona he calls Alex. Okay? This was Alex VA I was starting with. So I didn't catch that at first. I caught it much later, as my note indicates here. Why is that significant? Because they were trying to link me up with somehow knowing that Alex and Alex VA were the same person. But I don't know how I could have known that. I certainly didn't know it until many messages were exchanged with this new person, Alex, and then he mentions the aunt. And I said, aunt, wait a minute. Is this Alex VA? Oh, yes, I thought you knew. Well, I didn't know. And I said I didn't know. I said, it's embarrassing. I explained that I had a Grindr and a Tinder account, and I've never had anything to do with either one in my life. And I say that, I'm not very good with technology. And, I said, Alex, if I'm not mistaken, answered my ad. Bauer nods. Or the detective behind Alex did answer it. Now, later on, Detective Bauer on August 17th, 2018, will admit during pretrial testimony in the transcript that he approached me, which is closer to my recollection afterwards. And initially, I was interested until I was told the age. And now, at first, I didn't find the age because I was communicating with several people on a couple of different apps, and I didn't see it. I realized at some point I was putting some explicit things out there, and then realized that this person had said a particular age, and I went and checked. So I didn't know the age at the time, and the explicit things were not onto that particular account. Okay? It was actually to a young person named Zach, who's 24, okay, which they tried to frame me for, and they will try here. But remember, he's not letting me see my phone to verify this, so I don't know. Again, had I said nothing, I want to see my lawyer, but I thought I would leave in a matter of a couple hours. I would simply explain it. He would see that there's nothing on either phones, and that would be the end of it. And I was very, very naive. Naive doesn't make me guilty. And how old was Alex? I said, I think he said a couple of things. He said 14 at one point, or maybe 15. I don't recall offhand. I'd have to look at my phone. I'm sure everybody's looked at my phone by now, though, so you should know. No one's looked at your phone, he says. Detective Bauer says, we can do that if you want. That turned out not to be true. Well, I said we may have to confirm a number of things. In any event, I remember saying, you're too young to be on this app. You shouldn't be on the app. It's not appropriate to be on this app. And the detective is nodding. The security thing, again, I'm going by recollection because I was doing several different things at different times with several different people at the same time. I put some explicit stuff out and then I backed off from the app, but I need to verify that by looking at my phone. Okay? That's the culture of the app. I said, as if to say hello, as you put a particular picture out there. And then the person said something like, it just sounds so awful to say. And it made me think, I've been a teacher now for a long time. You shouldn't be on the app. And he interrupts me, asks me where I taught, etc. And I go on, I say, and this boy told me his father left, his mother left, he lived with an aunt. And Bauer shrugs at this point, which is a weird thing for him to do. And this is at 12 minutes, 54 seconds. And I said, I've seen this before. Every school I've been at, everyone without exception has had kids who committed suicide or been endangered each year. If you know anything about the statistics, I don't know if police get involved in that. I once had a boy come and tell me, I just go on and I just tell about several situations for the next couple of minutes. I said, this boy he seemed like he was hurting. And I've been there. I know what that's like. So it wasn't like I kept saying, I want to meet you, I want to meet you, I want to meet you. As you keep saying, I told the detective, I don't know who is behind it. But I said, if we're going to meet, and this was much later, rather I want to just talk to him, to try to talk to him and see if he was okay. We couldn't do that on texting, even though I tried to divert him onto texting, because I'm just lost with the app. And Bauer laughs and says, right. And my internet communication skills, and he laughs again. And that's why I said, let me talk on the phone. Right, Bauer says. I was eventually going to contact the aunt and sit down and meet with him and say, you're too young to do this, as I said in person, as I said on the app. I remember I told him he should not be on it, the app Grindr. The problem was that I was communicating with several other people, and at one point I can show you on the phone the person I was communicating with, and one can compare the conversations. A 816 number, a guy I met on Grindr. And again, I'm exploring on the app. I'd never done anything like this before, and so when I would sit him down. I wrote, and when I would sat him down, when I would sit him down, I thought I would explain what happened, what was going on, because what actually happened is I got confused, and in the afternoon, after meeting with Zach, I said, where are my manners? I promised to pay for part of the room, and Bauer, as Alex, picks up the conversation. I thought I had made a mistake and inadvertently typed to Alex some explicit stuff, but I was talking to Zach. Detective Bauer tried to have that entered into evidence against me, and he failed to do that at pretrial. The judge dismissed it and said, no, that wasn't relevant at all. So originally he had a couple of charges against me, but they were dropped to one, computer solicitation, which still is wrong, okay? I tried to send, thought I was texting to Zach instead of Alex. It was the opposite, and it was simply a mistake, and I didn't want to put a lot of things in text messages. And I had already made a lot of mistakes, and he seemed emotionally fragile. And that was my explanation as to why I wanted to meet with Alex. And that was it, because I tried everything else before. At this point, I didn't know that he was being trafficked. I just thought he was vulnerable. Yeah, I know, it's being a kid. Okay. And I said I wanted to meet him if I met him in a public place. I kept saying that. And he kept pushing for a meeting. Well, what are we going to do? What are we going to do? And that seemed very strange to me, because I didn't really want to meet him. But again, my thought was all the time, what happens if this kid commits suicide? What happens if he's in danger? And this is at 17 minutes. At this point, Detective Bauer stops me. I've given him a narrative. I suppose if you're a lawyer listening to this, you might say, well, you maybe hung yourself by just simply talking and explaining. Maybe, but there's nothing in here that indicates I wanted to do anything with a child. That was untoward. And remember, I'm a professional teacher and I help kids all the time. I talk kids out of suicide. Okay? I got them to study. I got them help so they weren't depressed. I helped get them meds by working with their parents and talking to them. I did so many different things for kids over time. To me, this was just second nature. So Bauer says at 1712, let's go back a little bit. When you said you were talking for the last couple of weeks, well, it was off and on, and yeah. So you say, and this is the first time Bauer, tries to twist my words around. He says, so you say you entertained it. What was the word you used? 1735. When you said you were just talking and you entertained it, and I interrupt him. What do you mean by that? Well, let's go outside the one. I don't know what he's talking about there. I think I know what you're referring to. You were referring at one point to the conversation when you were talking about oral sex or something like this. This is the second time he twisted around. I was never talking to Alex VA about oral sex. But what he's referring to is the conversation I had with Zach. Okay, I thought I was talking to Zach on Zach's phone number. And if you look at the entirety of the conversation, it's very clear I'm talking to somebody else. But Detective Bauer takes over the phone call, illegally impersonates Zach, who's not a persona. Zach is a real person, and twist the words around. And I say, well, no. What I did, well, I'd have to look at my phone, but honestly, what I did was at one point, I was dealing with this other person, meaning Zach. I was in a conversation from about 2 o'clock in the afternoon, until, I'm embarrassed to say, like 6:30 at night. I'm embarrassed because I'd never talked so long in text like that. And I didn't realize I was dealing with somebody else, meaning Alex instead of Zach. And then he's saying to me, what are you talking about? Now Bauer interrupts me and he says, of course I did. I said, what? And he didn't respond. I'm like, oh my God, this is awful. This is some 14-year-old kid. How could this kid be on here? Okay, and every time I started to do that, and Detective Bauer interrupts me again. Okay, and again, what I'm doing is I'm explaining at this point that he had told me that this was a 14-year-old. I didn't know that at the time because I thought I was talking to Zach. It does get confusing, but it is not what he said it was. And he says, I'm not here to judge you, and this is a place where you can just tell me what's going on. And I said, yeah, I'm trying to. Okay, I said, I don't know what my exact words were. And again, he's holding my phone. We can roll the tape and find out, I say, but that's what I meant all along. I wanted to meet with him after the mistake, and I learned that I was actually not talking to Zach because I thought this was a fragile young guy, 1921. Okay? And I say here, let's see. I say, I feel bad about it. I feel guilty that I'm summarizing about 5 or 6 lines in here. Not because I did anything wrong, but because of what he told me. That I was trying to help somebody, and I ended up talking to not Zach, the 24-year-old, but Alex VA, the 14-year-old. Of course, all along I was talking to Detective Bauer, who took over and never told me, oh, wait a minute, I don't know who you're talking to here because we didn't meet in any hotel. I didn't meet with Alex VA, and that was the part of the case that was thrown out. But it just goes to show you that Detective Bauer was happy to exploit any confusion at all so that he could make a point, which is to try to get enough of rope there for me to hang myself. Okay, and he said, I'm feeling bad, and I said, this may ruin my career. And I say this ridiculous thing like good people don't get arrested. He says good people do get arrested. They just make bad decisions. And I'm thinking all along, I accidentally talked to somebody named Alex VA, and I never did. I was trying to talk to Zach at one point, and this is how they reeled me in. The only sex talk is to Zach on Zach's number, which was different than the Alex VA number that I was contacting Detective Bauer on. He says, where's the conversation you said you were having with another adult male that is misunderstood? Well, that was the conversation. And he said, where was it? Was it on Grindr or another app? It was on Grindr and on text, because I've gotten text from that person while I was on Grindr. I'm explaining that to you. Do you normally exchange numbers or you don't? At some point you do. I don't know. None of this is exactly normal for me. Here's the number, 860. Okay? So he says, was that your idea of his? I said, I don't know. I don't know whose idea it was. The point is, I had so many things going on and I was sufficiently busy. I had my phone and I was running around doing things, and I was helping my friend, and I was tapping back, and it took me literally like 5 hours to realize that I had inadvertently been apparently talking not to Zach, but to Alex. And then I was angry that Alex was responding, and that made things even worse. It made things worse because I thought I had actually harmed a kid, when in fact I was trying to take a proactive stance all along. Okay? And I go on and I say I couldn't see my, I get busy, I don't pay attention as much, and I sent things apparently to the wrong person. This is based on what I just said about the conversation that I inadvertently typed in Alex VA's phone to Zach, but it was on the Alex VA number, which I didn't pay that much attention to. And I'm even getting confused as I'm explaining it a little bit here. I said I couldn't send it even pictures because I couldn't see their profiles and I didn't see my profile. Mine defaulted to 99. And Bauer says, your profile says 99? I said, yeah, that's what somebody on the app told me, but I couldn't find it to replace it. So what that means is that it is a default setting, I tell him. I was never able to get to the profile to do anything, and I still couldn't figure it out. So when you set up Grindr, how did you set it up? Is it a phone number or an email? Notice how he changes the subject now, and he wants to talk about the process, because I've gotten to the point where I've said to him that I wasn't communicating deliberately with Alex VA. I was talking to Zach. I typed it in the Alex VA box accidentally, inadvertently, and was horrified to find I had done so. So he changes it now. He switches it around. But you'll notice that he deliberately focuses on the only place where there is explicit talk to an adult named Zach, and he tries to use that against me, and the court throws that out on August 17th, 2018, and there's no other sex talk. They needed that. And the conviction still went forward. It still went forward. They weren't interested in finding out that there was a man who was going to be railroaded. That didn't bother them at all. This is the end of part one. It's already gone 29 minutes. I hope it makes some sense. And I will go on to part two, trying to condense it. I've gone into, this is only 23 minutes into the entire interrogation. So this is Norman Michaelation. This is I.C.A.C. Unpacked. You can see why I waited a long time to do this, because it is potentially very confusing. So I hope you understood that, and have a good